So Super Rugby round 12 Saturday games. There are a few pretty exciting looking fixtures on this list. I'm pretty keen to get into these, so let's just start. I should note that there are not one but two teams of guys around this building I'm currently in who are working with, I'm assuming, jackhammers. They've been going for gold pretty much all morning, so if that picks up on the mic, sorry about that, guys, but yeah, every time I wait for a lull in one, the other team just seems to start up. So we'll see how it goes. In the first one, the Hurricanes are playing the Lions in Wellington. It's got the look of kind of game of the round all over it. It's two top sides, and they've got a bit of recent history as well, with the Hurricanes beating them in a final and the Lions beating them in a semi-final, kind of in recent years. So there's a bit of blood between these teams, and it should be a cracker. The Canes, in terms of the New Zealand Conference, are 1 point behind the Crusaders, who, if they beat the Rebels, will only extend that out a bit further. So the Hurricanes have got a game in hand on the Crusaders and basically need to put this one in the bank just to ensure that they are not letting the Crusaders get away on them. For the Lions, they're still an 11-point kind of leader over in the South African Conference, so it's a pretty comfortable gap, but it'll only take 2 losses in New Zealand and a team in the next 2 weeks to get 2 wins in a row for the pressure to start going on. So yeah, there's incentive for them to do well here. For the Canes, Laumapi is back from his All Blacks rest period, as is Fafita. So it means one of the stars of my team of the week last week, Vince Aso, is dropped from the matchday 23 altogether. Tumaga Allen is also starting ahead of Ben May. Nihi Milner-Skudder returns again on the bench, probably hoping for a little bit more in terms of involvement this week. For the Lions, Franco Mostert's back in the second row, which is probably encouraging. Groom gets to start at 9. Dianti is finally back from injury. He's on the left wing, so that's a very good thing for them. He's been a really exciting player for the start of the season. Super sub Manus Skurman is finally getting a start, so he's had a really couple of good weeks in Australia from the bench, so we'll see if he can kind of keep that up for a longer period this time. Quagga Smith moves over to 8, and once again they rotate their props around to try and keep things fresh. So yeah, pretty strong teams on both sides. Like I said, the Canes have got that game in hand on the Crusaders, so they really can't afford to be dropping any points, even though it's the Lions. Interestingly, the Lions have never beaten the Hurricanes in New Zealand, so there's a bit of history there as well for the Lions to potentially, kind of break that duck. And I mean, for all money, it looks like a Hurricanes victory. I mean, the Hurricanes have got a 13-point advantage according to the bookies, so that's pretty kind of one-sided. But so far against the South African teams, the Hurricanes have not been that good. They lost to the Bulls and they really struggled against the Sharks. That was at home, although not in Wellington. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting game. You would have to think that the Lions are going to have a big improvement from what they showed us in their performance against the Reds. If nothing else, they step it up for the big games, and this is one of their biggest games of the season. In the next game, it also has the potential to be a game of the round for totally kind of different reasons. The Tars haven't hit their full stride this season. I think that's been evident in a couple of their performances, but they're definitely improved from last year, which is not that hard because last year they were really bad, but improvement, which is more than we can say for the Blues. The Blues were bad last year and they are really struggling this year. So I mean, the Blues record of 2 wins and 7 losses is pretty ugly reading, whereas if you're the Tars, 5 wins, 2 losses and a draw is comparatively very good. So I think the main talking point for this game is going to be the Australian struggles to beat New Zealand teams over the last, I think it's 35 or something games. New Zealand teams have won all those games in a row, but there's real potential here for that kind of drought for Aussie teams to be broken with a Tars victory over the Blues here. Like I said, the Tars are improved from last year. They're not playing their best rugby, but they're on a better track. and the Blues have just really been struggling. So in terms of the conferences, the Tars are still chasing the playoffs with first spot in Aussie Conference in their hands at the moment. But they'll want to put some distance between themselves and the Rebels. The Tars are coming off a bye, so they should be pretty fresh. For the Blues, really, at this point in the season, there's nothing for them to play for. The playoffs, I think you can safely say, are gone. But there's that record. They don't want to be the New Zealand team that drops this record. Although if you've got to think it's going to be anyone, it's surely going to be the Blues that drops it. For the Tars, Israel Folau is back at 15, so that's good news for them. Although they've been doing all right without him. They've not dropped a whole lot of games. So that means also Cam Clark's on the right wing. And naughty boy Nick Phipps, who got sanctioned recently for some pretty foolish behaviour, is on the bench. For the Blues, Duffy is still at 15. He had a good performance last week against the Jaguares in what was otherwise a pretty bad week for the Blues. Caleb Clark makes his debut on the left wing. He's an exciting looking young winger, played in the Brisbane 10s and plays 7s, and just looks like a very good ball carrying winger. He's got a bit of gas, although not lightning, but he's got size about him as well. Pulu starts after having a bit of time off the bench last week, and importantly, Kaino and Tuipulotu are back. So it's a much improved Blues squad over last week, you'd probably have to say. It's certainly more experienced, so there is possible hope that the Blues could step it up. The game's being played at Brookvale Oval rather than Allianz Stadium, so I'm not sure. I think it's something to do with getting back to the grassroots is what they're pitching it as. Although my Waratahs supporting friend doesn't buy it, but we'll see. We'll see how the attendance goes at this one. The Blues definitely don't have as much to play for apart from the record, but they are a stronger team, like I said. And for the Tars, it's all there to play for. Put yourself ahead in the Aussie Conference, break the record against New Zealand teams, and yeah, it's all there. So I feel like both teams are going to be under a different kind of pressure. So whoever's leading with 10 minutes to go, I hope they don't go into their shell. If the Waratahs are leading and they're trying to hold out to get this New Zealand record broken, they might struggle. And equally, if the Blues are just trying to hold out to not lose it, they might struggle. So both teams have got pressure on for different reasons. The bookies have got the Tars by 4 points. So the Blues this season anyway tend to do better when they're not the favourites, so we'll see how that goes. Next game, in what should also be a cracker, a good South African derby, we've got the Stormers up against the Bulls over in Cape Town. So there's only 2 points but one game, so the Bulls have played one less game between these two teams, and it's a big South African rivalry. So far this season, John Mitchell's being praised a lot for the development he's had over the Bulls team, whereas Robbie Fleck on the Stormers has been criticised and his position has been questioned. So although there's only 2 points between them, they're on very different kind of runs in terms of their season. So it's kind of the questions being asked is this the fall of the Stormers and the rise of the Bulls kind of thing? Because the Stormers have been a playoff team for the last few years, whereas the Bulls have been out of it. So it's kind of questions of whether they're kind of swapping places. So yeah, lots to play for. The Stormers essentially have to keep their season alive with a win. Their season might be dead already, but they're still not that far behind because the South African Conference is really tight, apart from the Lions being at the top. For the Stormers, Maria's back at 15, so Dylan Ladd's moved to the wing. Rules on the other wing. Franz Mohuba and Jean-Luc Duplessis are also back from long-term injuries, so that's good news for Stormers, although Damien Willemse still starts at 10. Khaleesi is set to play his 100th Super Rugby game, so props to him. He will want to cap that off with a win. For the Bulls, Warner starts at 9, so we haven't seen him for a while. Rousseau is bracketed in with Ishmael, and Jenkins is also bracketed in with Bowley. So yeah, they must have some niggles that they're not quite sure if these guys are going to play, but I guess we'll find out on game day. The Stormers have been hard to beat at home this season. They are unbeaten, but their road record of 6 losses is kind of what's put their season in the position that it's in, along with other things. If they can continue their run and then manage to get some away wins going forward, you never know. But this game is pretty much a must-win for the Stormers. For the Bulls, the Stormers have got an extra day rest on the Bulls, I should say. For the Bulls, they can perhaps put kind of a nail in the coffin of the Stormers season if they go to Newlands and pick up a victory. But yeah, they'll also be putting their hand up themselves for a playoff spot because the Bulls are kind of there or thereabouts at the moment. The Jaguars have also put in some good performances recently, so it's kind of a competition between them and perhaps the Rebels, a few other teams for those kind of 7 and 8 positions. So we'll see. The bookies have got this one as pretty tight with the Stormers favourites by 1 measly point. So it should, if I'm speaking game of the rounds, the bookies are putting that as the closest one, so it could be. The last game, the Sharks up against the Highlanders. The Sharks are rock bottom in the South African Conference, which I certainly wouldn't have picked at the start of the season. The Highlanders are kind of flying a bit higher after that kind of clutch victory over the Bulls last week. So again, two teams on kind of different pathways at the moment. Rob de Press Senior, having been with the Sharks a while, has started to disappoint, whereas Aaron Major's first season, although the Highlanders aren't playing exactly how he wants them to play, still doing all right. The Sharks, though, so far have kind of troubled New Zealand teams. They beat the Blues pretty comfortably and almost pipped the high-flying Hurricanes. So you never know. And for the Highlanders, they're on the back of a good run. And have been putting pressure on the other New Zealand teams as well, so that they need to kind of keep that run going. Also, they're playing last this week, so they will know the results of all the other games. And if all the other New Zealand teams win, I'm not talking about the Blues, I want to talk about that. If the Crusaders, the Hurricanes, and the Chiefs all win, then the Highlanders know kind of, we have to win. So for the Sharks, the Beast is back. So that's good news. Akavinda Merva starts at 2 and Tyler Paul also gets a start. So there's a few changes there. For the Highlanders, Ben Smith back at 15 because Waisaki Naholo returns to the wing. Tompkinson's on the other wing because Tavita Lee has a foot injury. Frizzell is in at 6. The front row is Lomax, Coltman and Sayuli. They will definitely have to put in a better performance than last week where they were kind of under the pump. The Sharks... Well, they will need a very good run, kind of like the Stormers. They're in a very similar position. They will need a very good run between here and the end of the season to have any hope of making the playoffs. And it probably starts this week. A victory over the Highlanders would certainly kind of keep their head above water, but a loss would be really hard to come back from, especially if other teams get wins. For the Highlanders, it's basically keeping up the good work. The coach has talked about fixing the possession and territory thing because he's not happy with some of the numbers they put in last week. Even though the Highlanders have not been a traditional possession-based team, he still wants to kind of change that. So we'll see if they can do that this week against the Sharks. The Highlanders are 5-point favourites. So... yeah, they're the only kind of away team this week to be picked for victory by the bookies. So we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I think there's a few. I think most of these games are really interesting in their own right. We're not quite at the point of the season where it's two teams who have got no hope left, kind of going at each other. Every team is still fighting for survival, and the Blues have still got that New Zealand record to try and maintain. So. Yeah, every game has its talking points. What do you guys reckon is going to happen? What's your pick for the game of this lot? On paper, I think it's definitely the Hurricanes-Lions because it's interconference, it's two top teams, it's two teams tipped for the title. Lions, especially with their poor performance, need to bounce back. So we will see. And I'm going to try and get some peace and quiet from these jackhammers. But yeah, that's it from me, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.